and then we will jump into the actual demonstration. So one second here, we will start with some slides. So everybody loves a slideshow. All right, good morning. Good to be with you. My name is Alexander Krepis. As stated, I'm a technical solutions architect here at Cisco. Long-term security guy from 97 when I first joined Internet Security Systems that was later acquired by IBM. Focused on vulnerability management. I've worked at Tenable and Qualys over the years and also SIMS. Worked at IBM QRadar for over 5 years and focused on logarithm. And then also, I would say my focus has been on intrusion detection, intrusion prevention systems, behavioral analysis, kind of passive, either net flow analysis systems or deep packet inspection systems as well. Partnered with Mariano, I'm sorry. And he is, covers Cisco Kenna sales in the Mid-Atlantic states. All right, a little bit of, company history. In 2010, our founder, Ed Bellis is his name. He was the Chief Information Security Officer at the travel industry giant Orbitz, right? A wonderful Chicago-based company. Ed noticed, they had a really hard time distinguishing which vulnerabilities posed the greatest threat, and they really, wanted to find a better way to prioritize vulnerabilities, outside of the traditional CVSS scoring system. Ed joined with another gentleman. His name is Jeff Hewer, extremely talented software guru and programmer. And essentially, the two created an entirely new market segment. We've kind of coined the term of, risk-based vulnerability management. So now for over 10 years, right? We're in 2022. For over 10 years, Ken has, really been laser focused on solving one specific problem, right? Vulnerability management prioritization, providing like that single pane of glass, right, to work with vulnerabilities, based on some of the groundbreaking data science. And we have a number of different patents in this area as well. And then collecting, all the real world actionable threat intelligence, literally billions of events, folding into the system every month. Cisco, right? Everyone, we're all a lot of Cisco employees on the call. Cisco, the security and networking software, hardware, services, giant juggernaut, acquired Kenna in June 2021. So it's been about a year. And there's been a lot of interesting integrations, right? From Cisco's SecureX platform to automating the opening up of tickets, right? And then starting to integrate with, Cisco's other core security technologies, such as, the endpoint security products. I like to show this slide. It kind of makes things a little bit more, clear, right, of what does Kenna actually do. First and foremost, I want to say, we pioneered the risk-based vulnerability management space, right? One of the first, in the space, and some of the patents, right, and thinking and white papers released over the years, right, kind of prove, that out. But Kenna is not a scanner. We don't generate our own data inputs at this point, right? We rely on third parties, be it a Cisco, security core technology, right? Like Cisco endpoint, feeding back into us, right? Or it could be one of the traditional vulnerability management, infrastructure scanners like your top three, your Qualys, your Tenable, your Rapid7. Any of that data, right, folds into the Kenna Vulnerability Management Platform. Security scanning, right, and vulnerability scanning has been going on since, the 90s, right? Started off with, host-based scanning, right, on Linux boxes. Then, initially, Nessus was released in 1998 with the bug track post, right? A very established, market when it comes to infrastructure vulnerability management. Over the years, right, things have evolved. What's interesting, what's being attacked is kind of, shifted a little bit as well. As the years have gone by, right, application security has become its own, discipline, right, and area of research. So Kenna released a second product called Kenna AppSec. And this is where, the dynamic, web crawling, scanning technologies, right? The source code analysis tool sets, your burp suite, right? Very common, tool set out there would fold into that Kenna AppSec or, perspective. And then finally, we have a third product called Kenna VI Plus. So, larger companies, right, have been doing literally vulnerability management, application security, vulnerability management for decades. They may have, homebrewed their own solution, homegrown, their own solution, right? That is pretty effective, right? In Fortune 100 companies, this you see this quite a bit. But if you still like, all of our, custom database, all of our threat intelligence, right? Yeah, all the help we can give you reprioritizing vulns, we can move our entire database, right? That kind of VI Plus database into whatever solution you may have already built for yourself, right? Custom. So that's our third product that's kind of a little bit more specialized for maybe a larger customer who, kind of built things themselves. Let's talk a little bit about, the overall attack surface. And this is a really good slide, for that. It's awesome to have CVE and CVSS scoring as a starting point, right? They've been around forever, and it's a great place to start. But what I would submit to you, though, is only 21.2% of all CVEs have an exploit that's publicly released. Less than 2% of all CVEs have published and observed exploitation. All right, so we're kind of narrowing down our scope quite a bit. And this is what I really find interesting. Only 0.6% of all, vulns out there, right, have no published exploit, but are still, observed in the wild, right? From our threat intelligence that are being, actively used in break-ins. I would submit to you that 0.6%, that's the top of the top, right? The creme de la creme of active vulns. The things that get 100 out of 100 of in our risk-based vulnerability management scoring system, right? And that should be addressed first. After that, right, maybe that top 2-3% of vulns, right, we should kind of address, right? Literally that top 4.8, less than 5% of vulns are ones that we believe should be actively focused on, right, and prioritized to be patched first. And then we can, focus on everything else. The reality is no one can patch everything. You're always going to have latent, vulnerability inside your environment. And the reality is the larger your environment, the more some of that vulnerability debt builds up over time, right? Where you need a system to help you maybe make better decisions. And, everything being CVSS 7 to 10, right, is not necessarily, the best decision is what we kind of posit. So this is real world data. This shows you the effectiveness of Kenna, essentially. A customer brought in, roughly 21 vulnerabilities with just called a top three scanner, right? So this was, Qualys, Rapid7, or Tenable. Almost all of them, right, as you can see there, were being rated as higher critical. CVSS scores, right, nearly half of them are in that 7 to 10 range, right? The top three scanner, oh my gosh, it errs on the side of more vulns are better. And they literally almost 20, 17, plus million of those 20 plus million vulns, right, have been reprioritized, right, inside that scanner's way of looking at things as a 4 or 5. And then finally, Kenna. Kenna reduced this down to less than 5%. And I think that's, pretty effective. Some other metrics here that, we should maybe look at a little bit. 49,577 of Kenna high-rated vulns were not scored high by the top three scanner. So those are things, that you might miss if you're relying on the scanner, right? And the similar thing with CVSS. Nearly 45,000, Kenna high-rated vulns were not scored high by CVSS. We're, in that 1 to 6 range that typically a lot of larger corporations kind of, put down as secondary mitigation. What I submit to you is, several 4, 5s, and 6s, strung together in a meaningful way or used in an active phishing campaign will still get you on that box, right? Maybe not with the admin privileges or root privileges that you wanted, right out the gates, but it'll get you that beachhead necessarily. So there's a reason why some of the vulns, right, that are being actively worked, so to speak, out there in the wild are not the ones that are, highest rated. That's something that Kenna brings to the table, right, with that real-time threat intelligence. Uh, you know, this slide is interesting, right? What we're trying to say here is, we have something for everyone inside your environment. We really can create a self-service portal for, executives, security, and the IT teams themselves, right? Executives, they want to see that long-term trending. They want to compare, how they're doing to other industry peers, right? Is my risk appetite at company A in the manufacturing space more than company B? Can I bring, some of these metrics, key value indicators, right? Key performance indicators, can I bring them forward to the board So we have reporting kind of at that high executive level. One level down, right? Security teams, they want to see metrics on groupings of assets, right? And we call those risk-based meters, right? Or groupings inside our product. And we'll look a little bit at that as we move through the solution here in a little bit. And then finally, right at that lower level, IT wants to open and close vulns, right? They want to work tickets, through a self-service platform. They don't want to have to necessarily, have to interact with the security team on a day-to-day basis, right, to do their job and meet their expectations in terms of patch management. And on the left-hand side of this, right, we're just, the two main data feeds, right? Our global threat intelligence, right? And we'll discuss this a little bit more in a couple slides. And then all the enterprise data that we can possibly, fold into the system from all sources. We're vendor agnostic, right? We don't care what scanner or what data inputs you're using. And we don't, care what asset, CMDB, right? That might help us out with owner and priority information, what scanner you're using, what SaaS, DaaS tools you're using, et cetera, right? So this is that centralized location and normalize all that data and help me work through it a little bit easier. So this is kind of showing a little bit about what's unique with Kenna and to kind of how the algorithms work a little bit at a super kind of high level flow chart, right, from behind the scenes. So, once a CVE is put into reserve status, right, in the National Vulnerability Database from MITRE, that's when we begin our data analysis. So, as people on the call might already be raising up their hands. A CVE in reserve status may potentially not even have a CVSS score yet. We start tracking things immediately, even before a CVSS score is put into place, and we compare that vulnerability to all the vulnerabilities in the past that we're tracking, literally over 1.7 billion vulnerability, or over, it's nearly 13 billion vulnerabilities and over like 1.7 billion data points, right, that are being folded into the algorithms monthly. From there, right, we give it a boost or a bump in score from our open and closed source intelligence, each with their own weighting, right? Is something malwareable, right? Can I, send this out in a phishing email link? That could give it a boost in score. If an exploit is released actively, right? If we're on Tor and we're looking at the auction websites, and there's active people asking, well, give you 5 Bitcoin for an active exploit for this theoretical remote root on Linux systems, right? But no one's actually published anything. We monitor this stuff and scrape different Twitter feeds, auction sites on the deep dark web, right? Tracking this, right? So you don't have to do this internally. I would also say like the volume and velocity is interesting, right? Like the total chatter score that we track in the back end, right? How many active breaches are being attributed to specific CVEs, specific vulns, right? That may not have a CVSS score, all fold into this. The other thing I would mention here is the areas that are in that lighter blue. That's where we have patents on this technology, right? Over 10 patents and a number of them still patent pending. The other thing I would mention is that we don't hold all this, extremely close to our vest, right? We like to talk about what we're doing. If you go out and search for the EPSS system, that's an exploit prediction scoring system. That's a white paper we released a few years back, pre-pandemic. We spoke at Black Hat DEF CON, our chief data scientist, Michael Roitman, did, and went through a lot of the nitty-gritty details and complicated math and our thinking that, folds into what we're looking at here in this flow chart. So, there's some deep level reading if you're interested in that. Recently, the EPSS version 2, scoring system's also been released. I'm a computer science major. I will say once it gets into like some of the esoteric math about 5 pages in, I'm lost, right? I can't keep up with it, but very interesting to take a little look through. This is all of what's folding into our system. I would say also, now that we're part of Cisco, the Cisco Talos threat intelligence is also starting to be folded into the system here as well, alongside, right, all the exploit and threat intelligence feeds, right, that we're looking at. Remember, Cisco Talos, right, is really second to none. They've got over 400 persons, right, with hands on keyboard doing, active threat intelligence research. So it's nice to be able to leverage some of that here at Cisco. All right, we're almost to the demo, so if anyone's getting bored, don't worry, we'll be at the demo here shortly. But I want to kind of bring your attention, to the three levels at which Kenna scores risk. The first is, along the bottom, every vulnerability, ingested in the platform, anything with a CVE, even before it gets a CVSS score, right? Anything with a CWE, right? The common weaknesses and exposures. Anything with a WASC ID, right? That Web Application Security Consortium ID, right? Is all ingested. Additionally, Kenna can take in customer-specific vulns, right, that don't have official recognition. We can roll those into informational. Whatever data is meaningful to you, right, there's a way to get it inside the system using what we have called our Kenna Data Importer. So every CVE, maybe that's something you do traditionally at the companies that you work for, where new vulns of the week, of the month, right? Discuss them internally, try to reprioritize, look at our assets, figure out what needs to be patched. We take away a lot of that burden at the lowest level, right, of the CVE scoring itself. And we score everything kind of like, between 0 to 100, so it's a little bit more granular, right, compared to a CVSS score from 0 to 10. One level up from that, that's where we have the asset scores. This is something we can modify ourselves. We can give it a higher weighting, to what is important in our environment. The rankings for the assets are between 0 to 1,000, with really a special attention, right, given to certain IP addresses that are external facing. If it's not the RFC private address space, right, it's routable IP address space in essence, we give that a bump in score of 200. And then you can kind of see it's a little bit, tight on the slide there, but that last bullet point for assets, that's our formula. It's pretty straightforward. The asset score for each individual asset is the highest individual vulnerability score on each individual asset times the asset priority, right? 1 to 10, and we can set that in bulk, right, by importing in, asset databases, and then potentially adding in 200 if an IP is external or routable or DMZ, et cetera. So that gives me the asset scores. Finally, one level up from that is where we kind of separate out and group assets into what we, to working groups effectively, where we can write security policies, apply role-based access controls, overlay SLAs, right, and expectations onto those risk meters themselves, right? Maybe we group up business unit 1, business unit 2, together, something like that, right? All Windows underneath there and Windows, Server 2008 underneath there, et cetera, et cetera. Really have a nice hierarchical way to deal with grouping. So we can really map what your written security kind of risk appetite and policies are for dealing with vulnerability management, into, something that can be actively, managed in a workflow inside the product. So now that we've discussed, some of these fundamental components, right, of our solution, we're going to take a closer look of how this data is presented in the UI and work through it a little bit. I'll demonstrate. Well, we'll just get into it. 1 second here. All right, let me move around a couple windows here. All right. Any questions, comments, concerns? Happy to answer anything before we get started on the next stage.
I think we're good.
All right, fantastic. So, in essence, right, I'm going to walk through maybe how we would operationalize this or deploy it inside your environment. I think that's a kind of a good way to look at things. Kenna, has what I would call like 5 value drivers, right? The first one is consolidation and normalization, right? Bring all my disparate technologies that generate, those different CVEs, WASC IDs, CWE IDs into one central platform, normalize all that data, kind of similar thinking to the SIMs, right? But normalize all that data so I can work with it in one platform, right? That single pane of glass. Hate to use that phrase, but that's essentially what it is for VM management and workflow management. So that's the first thing, consolidation, normalization. After that, right, prioritization. Taking the security team, some of the patch management specialists, out of having to predict what needs to be prioritized, because of external, intelligence, right? We do that for you. We automate that process. Hopefully, we'll save you a lot of time. Third is the self-service portal. If all this information is consolidated, normalized, and prioritized in one single location, we want you to effectively be able to serve it back out to the teams themselves and have them deal with remediation themselves and remove the security team from being, the person to point fingers at and be the person that delays things, right? If you move all this data out in their own self-service portals and translate your written policies and expectations into this, then it's literally they can work through things at their own pace. Everyone works at a different pace, and that's a fine thing to do. And then, finally the reporting, right? And there's a couple ways to look at the reporting. There's a historical trend reporting, which is more on that K page we'll look at here. That's an executive overview page. And then, some of the peer-to-peer benchmarking that we have. I guess that's really on the K page, and the historical trend reporting, I guess, is more, down to each individual risk meter. So we'll look at that as well. So those are all the key use cases, value drivers. So let's go over to connectors first. We support 55 plus connectors out of the box. We have most of them worked into the UI. We do have some additional connectors out on GitHub that we've also kind of open sourced, how we're working with this. So, typically things might move into the GitHub and then they, will get rolled up into the official UI connectors, right, as they're released and finalized. So keep that in mind. But it's across everything, right? Anything that would generate, vulnerability information, asset, information with host, priority level for assets is something we can bring in. Bug bounty programs. Large organizations are paying external parties, right, to look for bugs in their applications. We've coded up to the HackerOne API, and we can import that data on a regular basis. Discovery, right? I kind of need to, maybe we're not vulnerability scanning in my entire environment, but we still maybe want to have all the assets inside the platform, right? So it's easy to bring that in with Qualys, ServiceNow, even Nmap scans looking for port and operating systems can be brought in. I would also submit to you, it's very easy to take in, well, not, everything takes work, but it is doable and not that complicated to bring in, external data sets that you don't see here in the UI. I work with another salesperson out of the Chicago kind of office here, and we recently brought in, Sharewell asset database to the tunes of nearly 40,000 assets. We were also able to reprioritize those 40,000 assets and then also assign out the owners, right? Wasn't something that was supported, but after doing that work, I would imagine it will be supported officially in the future. So that's kind of some of that asset discovery. All the DAS tools, right? These are the tools that will go out and crawl, right, your website. A little different, kind of perspective than vulnerability, traditional infrastructure vulnerability management. One of the most popular tools, right, in this DAS tools, right, being Burp Suite. The Kenna data importer. This is where we wrote, some interesting automated kind of ways to import Sharewell asset data. But effectively allows us to automate and bring in unsupported data types, and then normalize and correlate, consolidate down that data as well. Open source, scanning tools here that we see. Static analysis tool, Veracode, very popular. Micro Focus, very popular. Check marks. And I would say, these are, some of the traditional vulnerability management scanning, infrastructure vulnerability management scanning. That may be, host-based, and it may be, network-based, right? But, these are the most common ones here. And we don't, have to bring in all that data, then not make interesting use of it. We can, easily push out and open up tickets in all the common, ticketing platforms that are out there. So that would be, bringing in the data, that consolidation and normalization, the first thing that we would do, right, if you're interested in looking at this solution. So once we've kind of successfully set up those connectors, the next thing we would do is move over to this VM Explorer page. This is where we can start to see some of the initial prioritization, right, as things have moved through the Kenna algorithms. We can see we've got, 4,300 plus assets from the different connectors that we have deployed. Nearly 350,000 vulns associated with that, and then a number of fixes as well. Right away, we can see that prioritization. This 100 to 100, that's a Kenna score. Here's the CVSS score. We might also have a scanner score associated with this as well. And here we can see the scanner score, the service tickets, right? Anything that might be associated with this, any of the tags that we're bringing in from your scanners. So it's easy, right, to get low-hanging fruit and kind of quick, hits. These are some of the really popular search parameters, right? And I'll show you a few more, but maybe active net breaches, easily exploitable, malware exploitable. Click on that one. And let's say popular targets. Now we've, kind of narrowed things down, right, to, 400, specific assets, with this subset of vulnerabilities. Oh my gosh, right? Everyone's been dealing with this one for a while, and there's still probably some of that latent vulnerability, unfortunately, in some of these environments. But here's Log4j, right? Don't have to kind of explain this to the crowd, but there is a fix available for it. This is coming in from our 18 plus feeds, right? That 1.7 billion pieces of intelligence that are folding into our algos every month, right? We're seeing this as an active internet breach, right? It's not arguable. People are using this to break into machines, this specific CVE. It's also malware exploitable, right? So we probably have a number of MD5 signatures, right, associated with some of the malware data that we're processing in here as well. It's a popular target. So the velocity, right, and the speed of these attacks, right, are potentially increasing. Then the chatter that we're seeing out there on the open, web, right, is starting to increase. And then finally, remote code execution. Wow. I mean, if you're a practitioner and doing this for a living, like every, alarm bell should be, alarming at that point. If this specific volume was interesting to me, I could immediately, set the status here. Perhaps I wanted to accept this risk, right? Maybe it's a false positive. We don't judge here, whatever your workflow, says. But probably best to open up a ServiceNow ticket. We'll go out and, we can work on the ServiceNow side, make a number of different templates, and then load this up and then push out, all those relevant details to whatever party's interesting. Now, the other thing that we want to do here, let me just reset this. I'm going to go to the dashboard and go back to Explore. So we're bringing in the data. We can get some, initial quick hits, right, of what's most important to me by using some of these pre-built searches. But we have a lot of ways, right? The next thing we want to do is kind of turn this into that self-service portal that Kenna promises. So this is kind of like our SIM style search box across assets and volumes. And I'm just going to pop this up and let you look at a little of these because we won't have time to look at all of these, but a number of different ways, right? We can search through assets and group, like things, business units, whatever's interesting together. Maybe name all your workstations, WKSTN, blah. We might be able to group all the workstations from that nomenclature together very easily. Same thing with IP address ranges. If we have maybe a network priority sheet, right, that's interesting, we can fold that data in very easily and open up a lot of groupings in here as well. Net BIOS names if it's a Windows environment, or potentially even MAC addresses, right? A lot of different ways to search that. Same thing with vulnerability, terms themselves, right? We could, search for a specific CVE. I'm just gonna cheat a little bit here and save my fingers. If I'm gonna copy this one, we might take a look at that one here. But just kind of scrolling down and looking at, some of the ways, right, that we can, slice and dice this down, right, to what's meaningful to me. How fast are vulnerabilities getting fixed, right, or meeting our SLAs in terms of the threats that are out there in our environment. I'm going to pop this one in here, but I'm going to change it from Adobe. A really common use case that Mariano and I have seen a few times, and Mike Sarrazin, another sales gentleman I work with, have seen a few times, is this, a use case of looking for, end of life, software that's been deprecated, right? Again, these are, lower level vols, right, in this specific data set on our demo Inc. system. But there might be a use case, right? Looking for Adobe. Maybe Adobe is something that, we have done, Flash is not inside our environment. Adobe has been removed because corporate standard is to use, PDF viewer blah. Maybe all end of life software needs to be removed, before whatever dates, right? But this was interesting to me, right? And maybe we identified a group that deals with end of life software. We could, save this risk meter off, right? Give it a name that's interesting to me, and then assign it, to one or more, roles inside my environment. This is where that role-based access control really comes into play. So we would work with your customer, right? Figure out how we can translate that written security policy, what their expectations are, right, in the self-service risk-based vulnerability management platform, and then fold that into a number of different searches, creating these risk meter groups, which we would then effectively create, one or more dashboard views, right? And we can limit this down to the nth degree. Maybe the persons that deal with Windows environment, they will, just log in, be able to see their Windows, environment only. And maybe they can only, open up tickets, but they can't, set something as a false positive. We can get down to that level of detail. The other thing I would mention here is we can have, a concept of a kind of a hierarchical, a view. Business unit one might have, Windows servers, Linux servers, remote desktops, right? Virtualized environment, underneath here as well, to kind of make things a little bit easier to visualize. I like this Windows one, so I'm going to pick on this one, and we're going to just click on Windows, and we'll go one level down and just kind of show you how that grouping works, right? Very simple search, operating system Windows, brought back all, 666 assets that are associated with Windows specific vulnerabilities. When we create these risk meter groups, the other thing that we're doing and starting to track, for some of that, this is where we get into some of those other use cases for that historical trend reporting is again, right, a certain set of reports that we start tracking from when that group is initially created. And then we also start looking at all the top fixes, right? How can I have the most impact in the shortest amount of time? So let's take a look at both of those now. Click on reporting here. So we can kind of see, we can add in a number of templates, right, if we wanted into it here as well, to kind of slice and dice down what, is reporting is interesting to me inside this report. But we can see, just kind of some of the total totals, over time. And again, past 30 days might be interesting. This was created January 8th, 2021. We could go all the way back to that if that was interesting to me. Maybe a specific time range of the last quarter if I needed to maybe cut and paste a few interesting graphs, to kind of elevate my conversation, around vulnerability management. What the highest score was, the lowest score over the last 30 days, the density of vulns on each individual asset, what the true risk score is. This is showing up as the same as my highest score, but this would show any vulnerabilities that maybe I've accepted that risk, right, or marked as false positive could potentially, create a different risk appetite score for us. Here we can see our risk meter trending over time. Apologize, but this is a demo machine. We got a lot of different people from all over Cisco using it, and we're not actively patching vulns, but I would submit to you inside your environment, right? Maybe we unfortunately start off in that high level, right? And Kenna kind of separates things out in thirds. The bottom third being green, the middle third being like amber, yellow, and the top third being that red or highest priority. But hopefully would maybe see you start off there and then move downwards to the right, right, as we're successful over time. Total assets and vulns over time. Active assets and vulns, right? So it's easy to kind of pick out anomalies, right? If I get very used to looking at these reports, right, over time. Just kind of scrolling through some of these so you can take a look. Oldest open vuln. Wow. There's a CV from 1999. It is continually reoccurring for whatever reason. Our demo system might want to take a look at patching that once and for all at some point in time. Some of the vulnerability timeline, right, and some alternative ways to look at some of this information. Again, kind of flatlined here with the demo data, but I would expect in a real world environment, it's going to look a lot different, right, as you start to deploy a technology solution like this. Now, the other thing that we're doing, right, is kind of helping you get the most impact, by doing the least amount of work as possible. So let's take a look at our thinking here for that. That's where this view top fixes comes for every risk meter group, right? This is something every evening, right? We're recalculating these top fix groups. So when a practitioner sits down in the morning to work with the, vuln data, they're, seeing how successful they were from whatever they did the day before, and then getting reprioritized actions for that next day's, worth of work. Well, this one's pretty effective, right? I've got up to 10 top fix groups. And then we can have, you know, oh, sorry, I should have put away some of the people are pinging me. Um, but we can have up to 10 of these top fix groups with up to three specific, most impactful, fixes for each of these groups. So here what we're trying to kind of show is that, we can move from a risk meter score from 910, all the way down to 752 by, deploying these, three fixes. And then we've got all the information, right, that you might want. The diagnosis, the solution with the links, what specific CVE, of course, with more information, all the assets that are affected, and what, brought us inside this information itself, right? This could be from, one or multiple scanners, right, inside your solution. Directly from here, right, open up a ticket with these three fixes, push it out to, persons that have the power to manipulate this, right, and get things fixed. Clicking Explore would bring me back to that, kind of that explore of all my views in the vulnerability database. So once we've brought in the data with the connectors, once we've made a number of these groups, and then we have a number of these dashboards, this is where we would start to potentially like kind of expand out the platform. We would add in a number of different users, right? Click on that and kind of show you that. Very straightforward, right, to add in users. And then we would assign those users, one or more roles that would be interesting to them. And these roles, I'll just click into this here quickly, get very specific. Just go, we could, give it a name, a description. Can I view the Kenna overview page, right, where some of that executive reporting is living? Can I view the AppSec reporting as well? What risk meters, what applications, right? Want to get all the way down to the permissions, but and then, all the gory details, right, of literally what I can click on and what I can do, right, in terms of my workflow management for this specific role. You might have, some persons that can only do, read-only access, and other persons that are approved, right, to, actually, accept the risk, right, or mark as a false positive. But this gives us one platform, right, to kind of work through all that. And then the final thing that we would do in terms of kind of user management is then, think a little about, our SLAs, right? Our service level agreements. What are we expected to do, in terms of our risk appetite? I'm just going to click on this to kind of show it to you, and I'm not going to modify anything in the demo, but this is, effectively where I can set what I want my overarching, recommendation across all my risk meters inside the platform, right? Do I want it, set as, do I want to remediate faster, right, than the peers that are maybe in my same kind of grouping, right? Software manufacturer, hardware manufacturer, et cetera, things like that. Or do I want to be, maybe faster than my peers, or all the way, faster than, the attackers, right, from what we're observing. Faster than attackers is a nice thing to strive for. That would essentially say, any asset that's coming into the Kenna system that we've set with an asset priority score of 8 to 10 that has a Vuln score, 80 to 100, that would be things that probably should be actioned, within, 5 days. I'll put it back to this. I think that's where it's set here in the demo system. So that's the overarching one, and then we can add in a number of these, right, all the way down to, specific risk meters, right? So we can get very, very detailed in terms of the roles, the users, the access they have, how they can use the system in terms of workflow, and then, what SLAs, right, that they're being asked to comply with. So we've gone through the historical trend reporting. I guess, one of the final things to kind of impress upon you is, some of our kind of peer-to-peer benchmarking and long-term trending analysis that we can do inside the platform. And that's some of that exists on this Kenna page, right? Or what I like to refer to as maybe that executive overview page. Here we can see our overall risk score in the last 30 days, how many vulnerable assets we have, how many total vulns, the fixes. And then right now we're getting into some of those, real key performance indicators, right, to show that, measurable value for how, we're managing our company's vulnerability management program, right? How we're progressing, some of our goals to reach, right? Maybe we try to gamify some of this, right? Some of our dashboard. Maybe we have a race to green, right? Where we have a pizza party. Everyone can wear jeans and hoodies on Friday, because we've successfully reduced, our risk to acceptable appetite over the last, 30 days, quarter, whatever makes sense. And then also, right, some of those key risk indicators, show, how I compare to other companies, right? Let's say maybe in the finance and insurance space. Again, this is anonymized, data that we're looking at here. But, how do I compare? I wouldn't say so much about, how vulnerable I am, but really more kind of change my thinking, put a different hat on is what is my risk appetite compared to others in maybe the manufacturing industry, or something like that, wherever I fit. And we do this, there's like an industry standard, right, that you can opt out of if you like, but that we would kind of put you into a bucket, right, to help you with that trending analysis. Here we can see the mean time to remediate, versus all industries or my specific industry. And this would be defined as if you wanted to use our solution and come on board with this. You could say professional, scientific, and technical services. Down here, we can see some of the overall risk meter scatter plot. These are all the different risk meters. We can look at them in terms of the asset count, in terms of, the vulnerability. Sorry for that. I should have turned off notifications. And then, the SLA adherence. Oh, wow. We had this is done on a daily basis. We're calculating this, but it's pretty nice to see 100% SLA adherence, right? At least for a couple days there, as we're tracking things. All my risk meters, are we increasing or decreasing, our risk posture over time? And how are we, working our total ticket progress over time? So, that is a lot of what we're, essentially doing with Kenna. The one thing I would kind of leave, the team with is this is kind of everyone's seen this SAM's vulnerability management, maturity model, I'm sure. But where we can really be most helpful with a customer is a customer that, maybe they're just kind of starting out, in this continuum, right? And scroll down a little bit. Sorry about this pop-up. But they're just starting out. They've just started to deploy a scanner. Maybe they're just using Nessus Pro, smaller customer. Probably not the best opportunity, right, to position with Kenna. Once they hit up what we like to call like that peak data overload, maybe they're starting to have multiple scanner inputs. Maybe they're a large enough company where M&A is a thing, and they go out and purchase another company that has an alternative tool set, and they want to fold that into one single pane of glass and make recommendations before they can move, the third party acquisition, into their corporate standard, way to do VM management, right? So having that consolidation and normalization, value driver becomes interesting. So moving from peak data overload, right, to effective prioritization, I would say this is where Kenna can really have a high impact in a short amount of time. And then once I get to that effective prioritization, and I'm speaking to the security people, right, the security people that have been 25 plus, years of hands and keyboard experience, right? If you want to elevate the conversation, right out of the nuts and bolts details, and then get invited to more, high level meetings where we look at, risk management, and is more of an effective discipline as opposed to the nuts and bolts and, speeds and feeds. This gets it, effectively. Some of these reports can literally be put into a PowerPoint, so you're able to stand up in front of the board on a quarterly basis, twice a year, and have more of a, business risk management perspective, right? And show that, you're capable of doing more than just hands-on keyboards and breaking into boxes and things like that. So that is it. So we can probably stop recording, and we can ask if there's any questions, any concerns.